So welcome, everybody. This is another in the series I call Crossing the Boundary, in which I talk with people who are doing really very important work in the world, good work in the world, and we look at how they themselves in their lives have crossed some kind of boundary to get to be who they are and do what they do. Today, I'm really honored to be speaking with Sami Awad, someone I've admired for a long time for his peace work, peace activism in Israel-Palestine, and who has, I only recently discovered a number of other interests that I'm also very interested in talking with him about. I'll be posting more details about his life and his work. When you see the recording, it'll be posted there. But I'll just say a little bit about who Sami is at this point. And I think a good summary is right on the back of his most recently published book. And it says, Sami Awad is a Palestinian activist committed to nonviolence, healing, and transformation. His path weaves personal and collective healing, the wisdom of ancient teachings, commitment to awakening consciousness, and living life through radical love. Also, Sami serves as the Co-Director of Nonviolence International and is based in Bethlehem, Palestine, where he's been a leading advocate of nonviolent resistance to occupation and an inspirational leader for building a shared future of Palestinians and Israelis based on equality and human rights. His recently published book is entitled The Sacred Awakening, Reclaiming Christ Consciousness. And we'll definitely get to unpack what he means by that in case any of you are freaked out about those terms. So, Sami, I'd like to begin. I often begin by asking people about where they come from, their parents, their ancestry, and so forth. But because of where you are, I want to just check in. How are you? How are you doing right now, where you are in Palestine?
Well, thank you, Alan, for the invitation, and thank you for starting with this question. And to really say, yes, I am in Bethlehem in Palestine. I have to say that when you are in a situation of war and genocide, one of the things you experience is just honoring your life every day and honoring what is available for you, what is given to you, what is offered to you, the life you're living, having electricity, having internet, having water, having a house, not having bombs dropping where we are in Bethlehem compared to what's happening in Gaza. And in a way, I start with deep gratitude for where I am and how I am. The situation in Bethlehem is not easy, for sure. Bethlehem, since October 7th, has become a city that is completely locked in. In the past, as you know, we had the walls, we had checkpoints. Now every single road in and out of Bethlehem has a gate in it that the Israeli army opens and closes whenever they feel they want to do that, having people locked out or locked in who want to go home. Bethlehem as a city is also a city that deeply depends on tourism. And since October 7th, as we know, there has been almost no tourists that have been able to come to the Holy Land in general. And so Bethlehem has suffered from that. But this said, life moves. Life happens in Bethlehem. Schools are open, hospitals are opened, universities are open, shops are open, restaurants are open. So people live. And this is something that I really, as a Palestinian, admire about the Palestinian people, that we live life, even in Gaza. Just in the last few days, seeing people, I was just watching a video today that brought me to tears of young girls cleaning up their home that is scarred by fire burns. There's nothing in it. A tile is broken and they're still cleaning it, singing and laughing. And so for me, the joy that life is to be lived is something that I'm very, very proud to say is part of my culture as a Palestinian.
Okay, thank you for that. So going back a little bit, uh, grew up with your parents, grandparents, perhaps. What 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 was it about your family, the community that you grew up in, that you feel was significant in shaping your values and your activities as they've developed over time?
Yeah. So I'll share the two sides of where my parents come from, because when you ask a Palestinian about their past, a lot of Palestinians will not say that my past is Bethlehem, because most Palestinians are refugees and have landed in the city where their parents or their grandparents landed, or the refugee camps, and that has become our home. But to refer to my ancestry, my father originally is from Jerusalem, and before that from Jaffa, from the coastal city of Jaffa on the Mediterranean. My mother and her family are from Gaza, from the Gaza Strip, and I still have distant relatives who still live in Gaza until this day. We were able to take the immediate family when the war began, 6 months into the war. My uncle, my aunt, my cousins, the husband of one of my cousins, we were able to take them out after their home and their property was destroyed by the Israeli army. And so my ancestry comes from the coastal area, from Jaffa and Gaza, landing in Jerusalem. In 1948, the person who would have been my grandfather was killed in the war, and he left his wife, my grandmother Huda, and 7 children. A few days after they buried him in the courtyard of the house, the Jewish forces came in and took over that neighborhood, which was right outside the old gates of Jerusalem. And they evicted all of the non-Jewish families from that neighborhood. And I always like to say non-Jewish families from that neighborhood, because that neighborhood, like many, many communities and neighborhoods in Palestine until that day, had Jews, Christians, and Muslims live next to each other as neighbors. This is our history that we are proud of. To always say our struggle has never been with the Jews of this land. And so my grandmother, sorry, became a refugee, and she moved to Bethlehem with her 7 children to live with a brother that was living here. The the influence of the family wasn't in the tragedy that the family experienced. The influence on my life was the response of the family, especially my grandmother, to that tragedy. And my grandmother always insisted that as a family, we will never seek revenge and retaliation for what happened to us. That revenge and retaliation will not bring her husband back, will not bring her territory back. It will only create more pain and more violence. At the same time, my grandmother also always insisted that as a family, we will never remain silent in the face of violence and injustice, that we will proactively seek peace, seek justice, and seek reconciliation with those who did this to us. That is actually how even she defined justice. The proactive act of seeking peace and reconciliation is justice. And she wasn't a theologian. She wasn't, she didn't study peace education or nonviolence. That was her spirit. That was her soul. And so my grandmother had the biggest influence on us as a family, teaching that to her 7 children and then 19 grandchildren that came after that. And I was deeply influenced growing up in a family that had always been committed to peace and nonviolence. As a child, the greater influence of the family, second to my grandmother, was an uncle of mine. His name is Mubarak Awad, who in the early 80s opened the Palestinian Center for the Study of Nonviolence following the teachings of Gandhi in India and the liberation movement and the civil rights movement in the United States with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the whole civil rights movement. My uncle Mubarak came to Palestine. He was living in the US at that time, came to Palestine and said, as Palestinians, we have the right to resist occupation. We have the duty to resist. We have the right to demand self-determination. And we could do that through nonviolence. And so from the age of 12, I was deeply influenced by the nonviolent activism of my uncle. And in that, also witnessing many Israeli activists who came and joined us as Palestinians in joint resistance to the occupation as far back as the early 80s. In the first Intifada, which started in 1987, the first uprising, my uncle was arrested by the Israeli government. He was put on trial. He was labeled as a national threat by the Israeli government, a single nonviolent activist who was also an American citizen as well, still is. And he was deported. He was kicked out from his homeland, never allowed to return and live here. In recent years, they allowed him to come as a tourist, as an American tourist only. And so the arrest and deportation of my uncle was I think the big turning point in my life, where it wasn't just something that I was involved in as a family. I personally took on the question, what is the power of nonviolence that made this Israeli government see in my uncle a threat and decided to deport him, to kick him out of the land. And since that time, my journey has always been to try to answer that question, the power of nonviolence.
Yeah, so it's been a long time, and this is a kind of personal question about the interior of your experience. Did you ever feel pulled toward violence, as given how bad things were going for the people and the violence on the coming from the other side?
Yeah. I can honestly say I never ever in my life thought of using violence. I will admit a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, and many, many moments of hatred towards them for what they were doing to us and how they were treating us. But even in all that, the idea of me using violence, wielding a weapon, using a weapon to hurt somebody else, something that never came to my mind. And in all honesty, say I'm glad I've never been put in such a situation where I had to even think about it personally, to use it. But this said, I understand that those who use weapons achieve goals, and it's not just people who are resisting occupation. The occupation in itself is a system of military weaponization, using all kinds of weaponry against us as Palestinians. Colonialism throughout the world has used weapons in their suppression of people, in the suppression of the marginalized and the minorities, wherever they were. And it's always this question, referring to the victim, of the use of nonviolence by the victim, that is always put the challenge. Oh, why, if only you Palestinians use nonviolence, if only you African Americans use nonviolence, if only you South Africans, then it will be different, while nobody is challenging, and not challenging, stopping the system of violence that is creating the injustice to start with. So in my heart, I don't use violence. I don't condone it. I don't in any way approve of it. At the same time, I cannot reject those who feel that using violence towards those who are treating them as violent is something that I am going to judge them for doing that. I believe in nonviolence. I promote nonviolence. I would challenge those who use arms to really think of it. What are the outcomes that we're getting when we do these things? But I understand. I understand that people react differently to different things, for sure.
Yeah, legally, speaking even, it's understood that armed resistance is a legal way to respond to military occupation.
And
But
yeah, so I look at it from more of a strategic point of view when I have these discussions with them.
right,
What has armed resistance achieved for us as Palestinians?
uh,
And let us look at it from that. And I feel the emotions. I know the anger. I have the same frustration. But in many cases, what we begin to unravel is that many people who use violence or unresistance use it as a means of revenge and retaliation for what has happened to them. Somebody from their family was killed, some home was demolished, their land was confiscated, their trees were uprooted, and that burning emotion in them could turn into a reaction that is violent. And so it's very important for us to honor the anger that people have when they are facing such grave injustices, and not to judge them. As Jesus would say, cry with those who are crying, and it is for us to mourn and to grieve with them for sure.
yeah. I know that you've put a lot of attention on the issue of trauma, and you talk about trauma being on both sides, and that a lot of your work is about helping people understand and heal from the trauma. Can you talk a little bit about how you see that, the trauma on the both sides of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Yes, for sure. In the work that I was doing, I used to focus a lot on nonviolent resistance. That was my thing. Training people, engaging in protest demonstration, getting beaten up, getting arrested, getting detained, coming back the next week and doing more activism, working with Israeli and Palestinians in joint activism to resist occupation. But then I began to ask more deeper questions. What is behind it all? Why are they treating us the way they're treating us? Why did the Oslo peace process really fail? The peace process that began in 93 that we were all so excited about. We were told this was going to be it. We're going to achieve peace. Why did it really fail? Was it just, misnegotiations, or this person said this and that person didn't like it, or was it something deeper? And in that journey, in my asking questions, I began to explore how collective inherited trauma influences us. And that actually came from a visit that I was invited to. You probably heard about the Bearing Witness retreats, Bernie Glassman and Eve
Yeah.
Marco from the Zen Peacemaker community. And they invited me to go with them on a Bearing Witness retreat to Auschwitz and Birkenau, to the death camps.
Mhm.
As a Palestinian, like most Palestinians, the great majority of Palestinians, we don't deny the Holocaust. But what we say, yeah, that's their story, and we have our story. In Auschwitz, I began to understand the motivation of the Jewish identity, that the trauma that they experienced in the Holocaust, and of course, centuries leading up to the Holocaust, mostly in Europe, in Western Europe, caused a shift in the identity of the Jewish people to an identity of the ongoing victimization and the need to always protect ourselves and the need to never trust anybody ever, because every time we trusted, look what happened to us. And I began to see, and in Auschwitz, I witnessed Israeli teachers tell Israeli children who go there every year in the thousands, the indoctrination into an identity of fear by them saying to these children, if the Palestinians have an opportunity, they'll do to you. Then these are pointing to these 13, 14-year-old Jewish kids. They'll do to you what the Nazis did to our great ancestors in Germany. Imagine being a 13, 14, 15-year-old child and being told that Sami, Muhammad, Yasser, Muna is the next SS soldier that's going to kill you if they have an opportunity. And you have to join the army. That's the only way. Violence is the only way for us as Jews to protect ourselves, because we didn't have the ability to protect ourselves during the Nazis. Now we have, and the army is it, and you have to join the army. And that shook me. that shook me, and I started researching trauma and collective trauma, what it is, and began to unravel that how the traumas of our ancestors affect us in the present day. And it's not just the Jewish trauma, of course, as Palestinians, it is the Nakba, 1948, and everything that happened to us, even leading to the Nakba, living under the Ottoman rule, living under the British rule, these suppressive systems. Even though we had a sense of more freedom in them, we still were ruled by foreigners, by outsiders. And then the catastrophe, the Nakba came, 75% of the population lost their homes, including my family, and we became refugees. How did that affect our identity? Our identity to become the victims of the most victimized people in the world, and how that shapes our behaviors, shapes our view of ourself, of the other. And so this was a very, very important research. And at that time, I began to speak up and say, for us to engage in real peace work in this land, we cannot ignore the pain of the past, the traumas of the past that have been inflicted in the land between us and the ones that we have inherited from the outside. And we saw this sadly as soon as October 7th happened, which was a tragedy. Immediately the Israeli propaganda and political system pushed that button, or flipped that switch of, aha, you see, we told you. This is the second Holocaust. This is what we were telling you from the youngest of age, that they are going to do to us what the Nazis did, and even began to create lies of examples of things that happened October 7th that connect with the ancestral memory of what the Nazis did to the Jews in Europe. And immediately, and as a trauma response, you saw almost an entire Israeli population just rally behind
Even the peace
Netanyahu.
activists.
Even peace activists, and that was a shock.
Mhm.
That was a shock. People that I've worked with, people that I've done deep activism with, people that have stayed in my home, all of the sudden began to justify the use of violence towards the population of Gaza, because it comes now from this existential threat that they were told is what Hamas was about. So yeah, collective trauma is key to healing. And now we are in this new layer of a new mess of new traumas that have been inflicted on October 7th and since October 7th. And sadly, everything we are hearing by the global political establishment is either how to move on or how to reach some treaty or agreement to bring some sense of calmness or return to some sense of occupation of the land without the violence, without addressing these issues. It's like putting a band-aid on this big wound until the next thing happens.
Yeah. So you've emphasized that real solutions, we want to talk about solutions, resolving this ongoing conflict and occupation, can't come from fear, can't come from hatred. That if that's what is motivating the new plan for a solution, it's going to fail. And that rather the trauma has to be addressed, and there has to be a change in consciousness, really, that orients the planning or the solution. Um, I've been involved in working with changing consciousness for 50 years,
Mm,
including my own. I find it to be a very difficult thing to do, even with people who want to do it, even with people who are choosing to change their consciousness. So I wonder about how can a priority be changing the consciousness of a collectively traumatized millions of people be the first step toward this kind of solution that we're seeking
yeah.
when it's so
So
difficult to change people's consciousness.
for sure, for sure. Yeah, and definitely it is not about changing every single person's consciousness. Uh, I believe that especially when we talk about inherited collective trauma. The way inherited collective trauma becomes part of my being, of my consciousness, is through the narratives and the stories that I hear, is through the language that is spoken to me by my leaders, by the people I trust, by the people that are in power. If it is in the religious institutions, the political institutions, the non-governmental, the activist institutions, the narrative that I have inherited, the narrative that is spoken to me becomes my identity and my narrative. And so for me, the work initially needs to happen at the level of leadership. When we have leaders that come out and begin to speak from that new consciousness and begin to enroll people and rally people around the possibility of what the future that we want to create is, instead of complaining about the past and using the past to justify their actions for the future. At the same time, it's not about ignoring the past. Consciousness means honoring the past, respecting the past, learning from the past, so we don't repeat the mistakes of the past, but to say there is a future that is also independent from that past. This is the kind of leadership that I think shifts communities. When we have somebody like Mandela, like Martin Luther King, when he gave the I Have a Dream speech, I always say that Martin Luther King had the platform to give the greatest I Have a Complaint speech. Everybody was listening to him. He could have sat there for 15 minutes and just complained about racism and what is happening in the South and how bad it is and how terrible it is. A shift in consciousness like him was, no, I have a dream. I want to talk about the future we're going to create, not the past that we experienced. And so if we have emerging leaders that are ready to and able to have that conversation with their population, I believe that is where that shift of consciousness begins, and people will begin to embody that new narrative and begin to engage in activities, begin to feel empowered that they are part of something emerging and something new. And I've seen this in small situation, in small cases, where a consciousness can shift in a small group of people to really move forward and achieving something that in the past they may have seen as impossible.
From reading your book, I think I know the answer, but I want to just ask you, do you at all feel drawn to being a political leader, being someone who would, do what you're talking about for?
Well, I'm glad you know the answer, and because the answer is no. um, in the book, and then I look forward to talking more about it with you. In the book, in my research, and was a research that's been going for over 10 years in my life, in my journey, in my meditation, and different practices that I hold to really understand what Jesus was about. I grew up in a Christian setting. I grew up in an evangelical Christian Palestinian setting. So going to church 5 times a week was kind of normal. My father was the founder and president of a Bible college. We lived on the premise of the Bible college. So chapel at the Bible college was also part of our life and practice. But what I have discovered about Jesus is that he wasn't just about reforming the situation that he was living in, or asking us to live in a reform situation where peace is the absence of violence and the absence of war, even could be the absence of conflict. He was actually inviting us to a shift in consciousness. And for me, if a role that I would love to play in peace in this land is bringing in that new consciousness. What does it mean to manifest a whole new reality of what peace looks like, based on what he would define as kingdom, and what we could define today as the greater consciousness, or the beloved community, or the great awakening. I mean, we could use whatever language we need to use today, where separation doesn't exist, where duality, the us and the them, doesn't exist, where hierarchy and patriarchy crumble in a combined effort of unity and oneness of all being. This is what Jesus was inviting to. So for me, I don't think Jesus was looking for good politicians that work the system, because you could have good politicians this round, then the next round you'll have the bad politicians come back again. So this is where that whole prevailing consciousness of a system is collapsing around us. He was inviting us for something bigger. Uh, so that's what I would love to play a
Yeah.
role in.
I thought that was likely what you would say, but I did want to hear you say it so beautifully.
I did run in elections in the past in the Palestinian parliament. So I did play that political game
Uh-huh.
in the past, and I did good in the elections, but I did not win,
Yeah.
thankfully.
Uh, well, I don't know. Let's see. So perhaps you will be able to, through the deep inner work teachings that you bring, influence some of the potential leaders of the Palestinian people, and maybe
Yeah, it's been
encourage.
beautiful holding space. Since the book came out a couple of months ago, it's gotten a lot of good response, amazing response globally. But even here, holding space where every week a group of us as Palestinians meet and we discuss different aspects of the book.
I was going
And
to ask you
and
about that. Well, that's
yeah,
great.
the
Yeah.
beautiful thing is it's Muslims and Christians coming together, reading the book and studying it together and comparing the teachings of Islam and Christianity, or Jesus's teachings, maybe with Prophet Muhammad's teachings, and having amazing discussions with them. And so in a way, that shift of consciousness is already happening just by us sitting together and asking, yeah, what does it mean to follow teachings that really call us for a radical shift in our consciousness.
Yeah.
And it's been amazing. There's about 20 of us that meet, and just really brings me such joy that these things are happening here.
It's so beautiful to hear that that's happening. Um, I do want to come back for a little bit more about Israel Palestine. Um, people people talk about two states, one state, confederations, and so forth. I think what I've gotten from what you've said is the focus needs to not be so much on trying to figure out the solution, but rather this kind of working towards the shift in consciousness. Something that you said, which I thought was just awesome, was that we need to, how did you say it? There needs to be the consciousness of one state, and then
Exactly.
figure out from there uh, what's the plan. How can we organize this in some way? So, what do you mean by the consciousness of one state?
Yes. So in reality, there are probably 23, 24 different political solutions out there
Yeah.
that have been thought about, analyzed, think tanked, research, you name it. Books have been written about it. I think it was a Norwegian guy that tried to convince me once of the seven state solution. He even wrote a book about it.
Mhm.
Uh, Again, as we said before, all of these solutions, for the most part, are embodied in the consciousness of fear and separation. It is the idea of my intention is to preserve myself first and foremost, and reaching an agreement with the other that guarantees the preservation of myself. And if I'm powerful, like Israel is, I will dictate the rules of engagement with the weaker in terms of what I need to preserve myself. And this has been the situation for the last 30 years of peace negotiations. Palestinians getting the crumbs of maintaining their life in the occupied Palestinian territories, in what is known as Area A, which is 15% of the occupied territories, while assuring and guaranteeing that Israel remains safe and secure as much as possible. It was a security arrangement. And for the Palestinians, it was about the Palestinians maintaining the Palestinian Authority, the security. How do we secure ourselves? And negotiating security arrangements between the two sides. And this was made to collapse. Peace, in its essence, is not about reaching an agreement, and it's not about fear. The basics of fear is mutual trust and respect, the recognition of the equal rights of the people historically and presently who live in this land. Once we reach this point where Imagine Israelis saying, we acknowledge the right of every Palestinian to live in this land, this whole land, from the river to the sea, in dignity, in honor, in respect, in safety, in security, in prosperity. And Palestinians saying, we acknowledge also the legitimate historic right of the Jews in this land and the need to live in security and prosperity and honoring them for their history. This is what I mean, the consciousness of a one state. When we are ready to live as neighbors, real neighbors, loving and respecting each other and taking care of each other, then we could talk about the two-state solution or the three-state solution, where it is not about separation out of fear. It is about honoring diversity, honoring culture, uh, honoring the history that is unique to each one of us, celebrating what divides us from each other in terms of tradition and history and music and culture. So the two-state then becomes a celebration of uniqueness, not a separation out of division and fear from each other. And we have always had examples of this. This is the thing. Like, this is not a pipe dream that I'm talking about. This has been the history of this land. If we look into the old city of Jerusalem itself, the old city of Jerusalem divided into four quarters: the Muslim quarter, the Christian quarter, the Armenian quarter, and the Jewish quarter. And for centuries, this is how it was. And each one was unique, but they all lived in the boundaries of the walls of the old city. And they invited each other, they traded with each other, they visited each other, they mourned and grieved with each other when somebody died, and then they would each go back into their cultural space. The neighborhood that my grandmother grew up in, Jews, Christians, and Muslims each had their tradition. Nobody tried to impose one over the other, but they lived next to each other. So this is what I refer to as the consciousness of one state before moving into the political divisions and the boundaries between us. I also frame it like, the fact that we've been negotiating the political solution is like two people arguing for the last 30 years about a frame of a picture. What should the frame be? Should it be a wooden frame? Should it be a plastic frame? Should it be a thick frame? Should it be a thin frame? Should it be a frameless frame? And they're negotiating the frame, but they're not sitting and painting the picture, the painting itself. Who's painting the painting? Let's paint the painting together. Let's put the colors on the canvas. And then once we do that, then we ask, okay, now that we have the Mona Lisa, what is the frame that will protect it, that will take care of it, that will give it that extra touch? But most of our argument for the last 30 years has just been about the frame. We even call it the framework for peace, ironically.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. It's like there's the vision, and then there's the structure that could implement that vision.
To
You
hold
have
it,
to have the
to
vision.
maintain it.
You have to have
Yes, let's get the
an
vision. Exactly.
intention that really suits the hearts and minds of the people that are there. So we're talking about a shift in consciousness, and how do people make shifts in consciousness? And I became aware, I don't know, maybe it was a year ago or so, of a video in which I saw you had been a participant in a ceremony that took a deep dive into the individual and collective trauma and healing the sense of separate identity that Jews and Israeli Jews and Palestinians had with each other. And there was a use of ayahuasca, something that I'm also very familiar with and have worked with
Hmm.
as an agent for transforming consciousness when used appropriately and properly.
Of course.
Uh, can you talk a little bit about that? I know that could occupy a whole podcast, but
Yeah, yeah. So
do you feel like that is possibly one element in the kind of transformation that you're seeking?
well, I will start by saying there are many, many ways to create healing and to shift consciousness.
Yeah.
And then there isn't a way or the way. And plant medicines have been proven for thousands of years as being tools that help at altering and shifting consciousness and creating spaces for personal and collective healing work. And then my experience with plant medicines, including ayahuasca, was one where I experienced deep, deep healing work and a deep inner shift in my own understanding of what we define as a reality that I live in. And what does it mean when we begin to connect to something greater than who we are, to the universal existence that we are all part of, to the oneness that we are all part of and we come from. And that actually helped me begin to maneuver also in my political journey, to begin to understand, yes, at one point I was advocating for the two-state solution because that was the only option on the table. But in my shifting in my own consciousness, I say no, this is not the solution. Separation, division, walls, checkpoints is not peace. It could be a temporary stop of some violence, a very, very small temporary stop, but it's not going to bring us any peace at all, even if both sides agree to it. That this land is holy and sacred to three beautiful religions, and that land is not meant to be divided at all by politicians who adhere to no spiritual tradition or faith other than by name and label, and decide in the name of Judaism or in the name of anything that they want to cut this land up and divide it or take the whole thing over. There is nothing sacred about that. And so for me, in being in those states of altered consciousness, I connected to sacredness. I connected to the sacredness that exists in all of us as human beings. And in that, uh, in the journeys that I was involved in many years ago, it was very, very interesting to witness when Israelis and Palestinians not intentionally came together, ended up in joint ceremonies, what happened in these ceremonies, and how in many situations when Israelis knew that there were Palestinians in in the ceremony space itself, immediately the medicine brought them into their experience as being soldiers in occupied territories and being soldiers who went into homes and beat up women and children. And that came very vividly for them in ceremonies as Palestinians are being there, things that they never experienced in other ceremonies, but just the realization that there are Palestinians there shifted this. When Palestinians also saw Israelis, what they went through, the pain and the agony of the reality that they live in on a much, much deeper level than just being a victim whose home was demolished or who was stopped at a checkpoint, listening to each other speak their language while in the medicine, singing songs while in the medicine, what that creates for people. And there was an alteration, an altered state of being that lasted after these ceremonies. And so I was invited, not as a participant, but to actually co-facilitate a space where we brought Palestinians and Israelis together to drink ayahuasca with the intention of the collective trauma healing work and the collective visioning work for the future. And that was the project I was involved in. It was a pilot project. It was an initial project because it's something that never happened before. And we took about 33 Palestinians and Israelis to Spain, and this is where we did the ceremonies. And it was very, very powerful. Very, very powerful. I think powerful beyond our expectations, maybe, which was created a lot of challenges for people when they came back because they were in such a space, and then coming back to the reality, social and political reality that they lived in was not easy. But I have to be very, very honest with you and say that uh, when we refer to October 7th and the shift that happened, the Israelis that began to really understand the manipulation of their government and where they were pushed to become agents approving of the genocide. Many of the Israelis that were with us in these ceremonies understood the lies and refused to buy into them because they experienced the healing from their collective inherited trauma in the ceremonies while they were with Palestinians. And so that consciousness of fear was not in them. That
Yeah,
consciousness of existential threat was not in them anymore. That consciousness that everybody wants to hate us and kill us was not with them anymore. And so they couldn't buy the propaganda and the lies of the
yeah.
Israeli government.
That- So that was very, very successful. I was afraid that when you said, "Well, I have to be honest with you," you were going to tell me they all went back to the army and started.
No, no,
No,
no.
so it lasted.
And
It
it's
lasted.
not to say all of them, a
Yeah.
great big portion of them. Nobody went back into the army for sure, but like,
Mhm.
and nobody endorsed or supported or
Mhm.
justified the acts of the army. But to begin to really stand up early on, I had an Israeli call me on October 8th. So October 8th, still nobody even knew what the damage of October 7th was.
Right.
And he called me apologizing for what we are going to do to you.
Mm.
And he said, if you never ever want to talk to me again, I understand. This is the effect of shift of consciousness. When
Yeah.
somebody whose ancestors were victimized and burned in the Holocaust and is told that the Palestinians are doing to you today exactly what the Nazis did, and he says, I don't buy your bull. I don't buy the lies. We are aggressors. We are occupiers. We are going to commit the genocide against the Palestinians now. And I'm really sorry for that, Sami.
I'm a little speechless, to tell you the truth. That's such a validation of that kind of work. I
Yeah.
hope there can be more. I know it's difficult. You have to go to another country to officially do it, um, but it sounds like that's uh, that's a real
I,
workable
I
pathway.
think the main work that needs to happen now is the work that we each need to do in our communities.
Mm.
There's been a lot of work and a lot of investment and a lot of money in joint spaces, not just in medicine spaces, but in all kinds of spaces. And part of my own realization after October 7th, when the genocide began, was that a lot of the work that we were involved in was work to also feed the system itself. And I think it's very important for the entire peace camp to really revisit everything that we did in the past and to really ask what is the work that we need to do, not because the funders want that, not because the politicians want that. What does it mean, again, to engage in work that is embedded in peace and justice and equal rights for all the people here, not to promote and advocate for the political solutions that the politicians and the economists want. And so the work, I think, needs to happen within our own communities now. If it is medicine or without medicine, we need to really focus on our communities. This is what I'm doing. As a Palestinian, I'm giving 100% of my energy for my people at this time.
Okay, thank you. So we have just some not too much time left for today, and then hopefully I will be able to talk again. But I wanted to check in with you about your really very quite new book that came out, The Sacred Awakening, Reclaiming Christ Consciousness. And as I sort of jokingly said in the beginning, a lot of people, particularly Jewish people, honestly, might be, unless they've expanded their consciousness in some ways, you know, a little bit put off by Christ consciousness. So,
Yeah.
so talk a little bit about your book. What, how did you come to, from having, as you said, grown up in a kind of what sounds like a bit of a fundamentalist Christian world to this, and what is this? What is this sacred awakening you're talking about?
Well, I'll be happy if our Jewish friends would hear me by saying a big part of this book is honoring an amazing Jewish rabbi who walked the land that I live in 2000 years ago.
Mhm.
And this is who Jesus was. He was a teacher, he was a rabbi, he was a human being like you and me, who, in my opinion, was able to explore and to experience and to put himself in every possible test and temptation to really alter his own consciousness He probably didn't call it Christ consciousness at that time. But but the word Christos means the anointed one. So it's the consciousness of being the anointed one, the chosen one, not as a hierarchy system, but as the one that has been able to really connect with the sacredness of everything, to the sacredness of our humanity and to the sacredness of the universe itself. And so for me, the my I started the book actually by saying I discovered Jesus when I stepped out of Christianity, when I stepped out of the institution that speaks about him, speaks in his name, but has completely embodied everything the opposite of what he was teaching, to the fact that Christianity became the empire that he even rejected during his time, the empire of temple, the empire of the center, the capital of Jerusalem, the empire of the priests who controlled everything, who used fear to manipulate the masses. And then sadly, the religion has become that. And then stepping out of the spirituality of what he was bringing into our humanity. And so for me, what I had discovered was that Jesus, as a man, was able to embody a greater consciousness that I refer to as Christ consciousness, the anointed consciousness. And in that, he was, as a teacher, as a rabbi, because this is what rabbis do, they teach and mentor and create spaces where apprentices learn what he does. This is how, you know, teachings in the past happen. It's not like going to school or going to university and then you choose from a series of classes what you want to become when you grow up and then you study that. No, in the old days, people learn under an apprentice to become exactly like them. This is what rabbis did. People who went to rabbis to study, their intention was to become rabbis for the most part and to become teachers. So he was teaching his followers the means and the ways of attaining that higher consciousness. And I think the tools of then still apply to our reality today. And the main part of the book that I talk about is something that is very, very known in the Christian circles, which is the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes that the Sermon on the Mount start with. The Beatitudes that are usually looked at as sermon materials or nice quotes to put on bumper stickers or magnet refrigerators. Blessed are the peacemakers, blessed are the poor in spirit. They are not one-offs for people who are experiencing poverty or who are experiencing mourning, and there's a blessing for them, a reward because they are poor or because they are mourning or because they are meek. The Beatitudes are an invitation to engage in the path that Jesus actually went through, which is poverty, which is mourning, which is meekness, which is peacemaking, which is seeking righteousness. And we are invited to embody each one of these steps in our journey that allows us to become peacemakers. Ultimately, the ultimate peacemaker, this is the last one. And Jesus refers to to become a peacemaker. This is the essence of the prophetic voice. This is who the prophets were. So we could call it even prophetic consciousness instead of Christ consciousness. This is an invitation for all of us.
Yeah, thank you. And there's so much in it. I mean, as I said, I almost finished the whole book in the last few days, and I'm really moved. Like I said, I've been involved in spiritual work and as a teacher and student for a long, long time, and I learned a lot from this and feel moved by it, inspired by it. So I really highly recommend it to people. It's challenging. You really put it out there almost as a kind of what you call Jesus a disruptor. And your book is a disruptor. It disrupts the paradigm and the ways that people are holding
Yeah.
their identity, even spiritual identity.
Yeah.
So I really thank you for the work.
Yeah, it's going back to that point where I think the core of the teachings, I know we've been discussing this throughout this call, is that there is the prevailing consciousness that we live in, and there is the higher consciousness that we are invited to. And I think every spiritual practice teaching, every indigenous teaching, every prophetic teaching in its core has this component of inviting us out of this consciousness, the prevailing consciousness, again, that is embodied in separation, division, identity over everything else, hierarchy, top down, who has, who doesn't have, into a whole different consciousness, because we could keep making peace in this consciousness as we've been doing for thousands of years. But whatever peace we end up with, we go back to war again. We go back to violence again. We go back to more separation again. And we think, why are we still here? Haven't we learned the lessons of the past? Well, you can't learn the lessons of the past if you are still in in the swamp. You have to step out of it into something new. And this is the invitation. How do we step out of this consciousness into a different consciousness? And this is where true peace actually exists.
There is the idea, and I'm kind of a subscriber in this to this idea, in a way that something is happening collectively to and with humanity. That higher forces, perhaps you could say, have an influence that is bringing about this kind of shift from within our souls, and it's coming into people's minds, and some of the backlash and resistance and intensity of the reactionary forces could be a reaction to that impulse within themselves, that they're fighting this new consciousness that's coming through for us. People call it the new age for a while, or a paradigm shift or something. Do you feel that besides the work of an individual doing this, that there is this kind of phenomenon happening? That
I fully agree with you that there is a shift happening. If it's coming from above or from within or from Earth itself, there is a shift happening. And I think we're reaching a point where we are unable to stay in the skin that we have been in for thousands of years. That, again, that old consciousness that existed for us. And so there is a shift happening. And as you said, and I fully agree with you as well, the system that exists will not give up easy. They will fight back. They fought Jesus 2,000 years ago. They fought prophets 4,000 years ago. They fight leaders who are visionary leaders today. And part of it for me is with the optimism that exists, that a shift is happening, to also understand that the consciousness that we are in usually responds in two ways. Either it fights to destroy or tries to co-opt what is emerging into it, to make it part of it. And this is sadly why we see a lot of spiritual practices and new age practices that have been co-opted into capitalism and into money making, into very expensive retreats, into one-off experiences that make you enlightened or make you a guru. And so that system is very, very intelligent and very smart. And then this is why, like for me, another core of the teachings of Jesus was we need to shift into the new consciousness. At the same time, we need to resist, and we need to fight, and we need to expose, and we need to trigger the systems that exist. There is no bypass. There is no way around it. It is walking through the valley of death, the dark valley. For us to reach that, we have to do this. And any bypassing and avoiding will only allow that old system to be maintained. And so, yes, we need to have the vision of the future and work every day in our life as if it is happening in our life today. And at the same time, address the daily injustices that we also are facing, the poverty that we are facing. Jesus didn't just tell the marginalized and the poor, oh, just believe and you'll be fine. Just, adapt kingdom consciousness and everything will be okay. No, he took care of them. He stood with them. He stood against the systems of injustice. He resisted the systems of injustice and also manifested the new. Because again, we create duality if we're not engaging in both at the same time. this or that. We have to do both. And this is where the term sacred activism becomes also very deep and dear to my heart. It is spirituality and activism coming together. It is moving to a spiritual reality, at the same time, the activism that is addressing the evil that exists in the world today.
Okay, well, I was going to ask you for summing up kind of, but I think you just did it. And
Yeah.
out of respect for your time and hopeful that maybe we can do this again, I want to thank you from my heart deeply for taking the time to be with us and sharing what you're sharing. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, Alan. Appreciate everything you do as well.